What do you do when someone takes everything from you and there is nobody left to call? Norelle Watkins knelt on the floor of the music center she had given her whole life to, surrounded by children's instruments scattered across the tiles, and held a broken drum against her chest. She did not cry. She did not scream. She just held it. Because the children who played here had nowhere else in the world that was theirs, and she was not going to let the last thing they saw be her falling apart. 3 miles away, the man who did this was already on his next call. Suit pressed. Completely certain. The way he had always been certain. That everything in this city had a price, and that the woman on that floor would eventually name hers. He was wrong about that, as he couldn't have imagined that the same woman, after everything he put her through, would save the life of the person he loved most in the world, long after he had given her every reason not to. This is that story. The first thing that hit the floor was a child's handmade drum. It didn't fall by accident. It was knocked off the shelf by one of the 3 men in city compliance jackets who moved through the Harmonia Community Center like they owned the air inside it. They had clipboards and official faces, and they didn't knock loudly when they arrived. They just walked in, the way people do when they already know nobody can stop them. The children were still in the middle of a session. 12 kids. Ages 8 to 16. Instruments in their hands. Norelle Watkins stepped in front of them before anyone else could move. She was calm. She kept her voice low and steady, and she walked the children out one by one, squeezing a shoulder here, whispering something there, smiling at the younger ones the way you smile when you are quietly falling apart and cannot let anyone see it. When the last child was out, she turned back. The compliance men were done. Papers on the desk. Doctor locked. 17 building code violations cited. The rehearsal wing condemned, effective immediately, pending full inspection. The lead officer said, "Nothing personal, Mom." Norelle said nothing. She waited until they left. Then she walked back into the main hall, knelt down on the floor, and picked up the drum. She turned it over in her hands slowly. The skin was cracked clean across the middle. A boy named Ezra had spent 3 weeks making it. He was 16 years old and had not spoken for 7 months after his father died in a fire, and this drum was one of the first things he had ever made with his own hands. Norelle held it and stared at the crack. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. She just knelt there in the wreckage of a Tuesday afternoon and held a broken thing that a broken boy had made beautiful. And somewhere across the city, in a corner office on the 32nd floor, Thomas Ridgway was already on his next call. Thomas Ridgway had built his name on one belief: every obstacle has a price. You just had to find the right currency. He was 35. Dark hair, hazel eyes, the kind of jaw that made people assume he had always been certain of himself. He ran Ridgway Group, one of the most aggressive real estate development firms in the city. Not the oldest, but the most relentless. He had an eye for what land could become before anyone else saw it, and a gift for removing whatever stood in the way. People called him driven. His competitors called him dangerous. Nobody called him wrong, because he had never yet been wrong. The Ridgway Tower complex was supposed to be his masterpiece. A billion-dollar mixed-use development stretching 4 city blocks. Residential towers, a hotel, retail, a conference center, underground parking. 4 years of planning, 3 years of acquisition. Every single parcel on that block signed over except one. Harmonia Community Music Center. A converted warehouse on the corner of Delancey and 5th. 19 years old. Non-profit. Ran on grants and community donations. And the quiet, stubborn belief that children who had been failed by everything else deserved at least one place that wouldn't fail them. It sat at the exact center of the project's footprint. Without it, the northern tower could not be built. The permits, the plans, the entire architectural framework, all of it was built around that corner parcel. That one piece of land. Thomas had sent 3 offers through his legal team, each one more generous than the last. The third was enough to relocate the center twice over, in a better building, a better location, a fresh start. Each time, a polite letter came back, handwritten, thanking him for his interest, saying no. He had sat with the third letter for a long time, not angry, genuinely puzzled. In his experience, everyone had a number. You just had to find it. He called Garrison Vance. Garrison was his oldest friend before he was anything else. They had grown up on the same street, gone to the same school, built their first small deals together in their late 20s with borrowed money and too much confidence. Garrison now ran Vance & Associates, a smaller acquisitions firm that had a quiet working arrangement with Ridgway Group. They didn't advertise the connection. It was useful sometimes to approach certain deals under a different name. Less history, less scrutiny. Garrison was the person Thomas called when something needed to happen that Thomas didn't want his name directly on. He came over that evening and sat across from Thomas with a glass of whiskey, and the look he got when his mind was already 3 steps ahead. "She won't take the money," Thomas said. "I know," Garrison said. "So what does she want?" Garrison swirled his glass slowly. "She wants to stay. But more than that. She wants to believe people are good. She runs a community center, Thomas. She trusts people. She believes in partnership, in cooperation, in the goodness of human beings." He set the glass down. "That is a vulnerability." Thomas looked at him. "We don't approach her with a buyout," Garrison said. "We approach her through Vance & Associates, a community investment agreement. Something that sounds like we want to protect what she has built. A formal partnership." He leaned forward. "And buried inside that agreement, in language she won't easily find, is a land use transfer clause. She thinks she is gaining a partner. What she is actually doing is signing over the land rights." The room was quiet for a moment. "She has no lawyers on retainer?" Thomas asked. "Volunteer board. No full-time legal counsel. She reviews everything herself." Thomas looked at the file, then out the window. The city below him, silver and gray and full of things that were about to become something else. "Set it up," he said. He said it the way he said most things. Clean. Decided. Already moving on to what came next. He would try later to remember the exact texture of that moment. He never quite could. Garrison sent a warm introductory letter to Norrell under the Vance & Associates name. He mentioned community investment, philanthropic partnerships. The letter was carefully written to sound nothing like a real estate acquisition. She wrote back. A meeting was arranged. But Garrison came back from that first meeting and said something Thomas hadn't expected. "She's careful. Warm, but careful. She asked good questions, and she wasn't dazzled by the money talk." He paused. "I think we need someone more convincing in the room. Someone she'll actually believe." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should go. Not as Ridgway Group. Just as Thomas. A man curious about community work. She doesn't know your face." He shrugged. "You're charming when you want to be. Go be charming." Thomas didn't love the idea of going himself, but he trusted Garrison's read on people. He went, but he was not prepared for what the building felt like. It was old and warm and full of sound. Upstairs, a violin was fighting through a difficult passage, stopping, refusing to quit, starting again. From a back room, children were clapping rhythms together. On a corkboard by the entrance, hundreds of handwritten notes were pinned in overlapping layers. Names, drawings, short sentences in careful children's handwriting. He stood in the entrance and read one without meaning to. It said, "This is the only place I don't feel invisible." He looked away quickly, refocused himself. Then he heard the piano. It came from behind a closed door down the corridor. A melody with no sheet music behind it. You could tell. It moved the way a person moves when they are working something out, doubling back, reaching forward. It was completely unguarded. So alive that Thomas stopped walking and stood still in the corridor and just listened without deciding to. The door opened. A boy came out. 16, slight, eyes that had seen more than 16 years should carry. He glanced at Thomas without much interest, then walked past him to the water fountain. A woman appeared in the doorway behind him. She was wiping her hands on a cloth. Rich brown skin, natural curls loose around her face. She wore a top the color of dark honey, and she had a smudge of something. Chalk, maybe, on her left forearm. She looked at Thomas. "You must be Thomas," she said, not impressed. Not cold either. Just clear. "Garrison talked about you coming, and you're Norel." He smiled, the smile that worked in every room. She stepped aside and let him in. He was good at the initial part. The warmth. The listening. He sat across from her in her small office, and he let her talk about Harmonia. 19 years, over 400 children served, a waiting list that grew every year and broke her heart every time she read it. He asked good questions. He nodded in the right places. He let her feel heard. And she was being heard. That was the thing he hadn't planned for. He was actually listening. Not tracking her for weaknesses, not cataloging information to use later. Just listening. To the way her voice changed when she talked about specific children. To the particular sadness that moved across her face when she mentioned the ones she couldn't help. To how she folded her hands on the desk like she was holding the weight of it carefully. He caught himself. Refocused. Made the pitch. Community investment, long-term partnership, a formal agreement that would give Harmonia financial security for years. She listened to everything. Then she said, "Can I be honest with you?" "Please," he said. "I've had people promise us partnerships before. Funding that came with strings attached. Support that disappeared after the first year." She looked at him directly. "I don't need a savior. I need someone who actually sees what we're doing here and wants to protect it. Not own it. Protect it. Those are different things to you," he said. "They're very different things," she said. He held her eyes. "Then let me see what you're doing," he said. "Before any paperwork. Let me walk through this place and understand it. Then we talk." She studied him for a moment. Then she stood up. "Come on then," she said. She walked him through the building the way someone walks you through their home. The percussion room with its mismatched equipment and a whiteboard covered in rhythm exercises. The string studio where a girl of maybe 12 was teaching a younger boy how to hold a bow. With the seriousness of someone who had recently learned the same thing and understood what it cost. The recording corner upstairs where a teenager was layering tracks, entirely in his own world. Then she stopped outside a door at the end of the corridor. Through the window in the door, Thomas saw a rehearsal room. A grand piano, worn but loved, at the center. And at the bench, the boy from earlier, the one who had passed him at the water fountain. "That's Ezra," she said quietly. "He's been with us 2 years. The way she said 2 years, like those 2 words carried the weight of a much longer story. "What happened to him?" Thomas asked. "House fire. He was 14. His dad didn't make it out." She watched Ezra through the glass. He didn't speak for 7 months after. School counselor referred him here as a last resort. Ezra was playing something completely his own. No sheet music on the stand. His hands moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was reaching for, even if he hadn't fully caught it yet. The reaching was the thing. It was almost too intimate to watch. Thomas stood at that window for 4 full minutes. He wasn't counting. He just wasn't moving. Norelle stood beside him and said nothing. She was good at that, leaving room for things to land. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He told himself it was strategy, managing the relationship, keeping her warm until the paperwork was ready. That was all it was. But the third visit, he arrived 20 minutes early and sat in his car outside the building and listened to the sounds coming through the open windows. He didn't go in for a long time. That was not strategy. He found himself learning things he hadn't planned to learn. That Ezra made a point of saying hello to Thomas now whenever he came in. Not warmly exactly, more like a test he was quietly administering. That the girl with the violin was named Patience, and that she had a way of scowling at difficult passages that made her look 40 years old. That Norelle kept her mother's photograph leaning against a coffee mug on her desk, because, she said, frames made things feel finished, and her mother wasn't finished. He learned that she had given up a career in architecture to come back and run this place after her mother died. He learned all of this while carrying a document in his briefcase designed to take everything from her. The weight of that was something he had gotten very good at not feeling. One afternoon in early October, she took him up to the rooftop. The building had a small terrace on the 3rd floor, where the older students grew tomatoes in plastic containers through the summer. The plants were done for the year, brown stems, bare soil. But she still came up sometimes, she said. To think. They stood at the edge of the low wall and looked out at the block. The city spread behind them in every direction, cranes and scaffolding and glass catching the afternoon light. You can see the Ridgeway Towers from here, she said. He looked where she was looking. 2 blocks north, the Ridgeway scaffolding climbed the sky. He felt something tighten in his chest and kept his face still. Does it bother you? He asked. The development? She thought about it properly. She never gave quick answers. He had noticed this. It bothers me when development acts like people weren't already there, she said. When it mistakes a community for an empty lot. She looked at the rooftops around them. The hardware store on 4th Street. That family ran it for 30 years. The woman who taught piano lessons out of her apartment on Delancey for 20 years. They weren't in anyone's master plan, but they were real. She paused. This block has a memory. I just want someone to care about the memory. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What would caring about it look like? He asked. She turned and looked at him. Like she was deciding how much she believed the question was genuine. It would look like asking that question before the permits are filed, she said. Not after. He looked back at the skyline. He knew the permits were already filed. He felt a pang in his chest but said nothing. They stood up there for a few more minutes in a comfortable silence. Going down the stairs, she said something that lodged in him the way certain things do. Quietly, without announcing themselves. My mother always used to say, you can tell everything about a person by watching how they treat someone that can't fight back. She said it lightly, like she was thinking out loud. Not at him, but it hit him squarely. He thought about it the whole drive home. Ezra started waiting for him. Thomas noticed it on his 4th visit. The boy sitting on the bench in the corridor at the time, Thomas usually arrived, pretending to look at his phone. When Thomas walked in, Ezra looked up with the expression of someone who was not going to admit he had been waiting. You're late, Ezra said. By 4 minutes, Thomas said. That's still late. Thomas had no response to that. He went to find Norelle, and as he turned the corner, he heard Ezra say, to no one in particular, she changed her tea this morning. She never changes her tea. Thomas stopped. Turned back. What did you say? Ezra was already looking at his phone again. The picture of innocence. Nothing, the boy said, badly suppressing a smile. Thomas stood there for a second, then kept walking. He found Norelle in her office. She had made tea. It smelled different, lighter. She pushed a mug toward him without being asked, which she had never done before. "You drink tea?" she asked. "Not usually," he said. He sat down and wrapped his hands around the mug. She looked at him with the almost smile she had, the one that didn't fully commit, but was warmer than anything that required no effort. He drank the tea. Later, in the corridor, Ezra was waiting with the look of a boy who wanted credit for something. "Don't," Thomas said. "I didn't say anything. You're thinking very loudly." Ezra grinned. It transformed his whole face. All that gravity he carried, gone for a second. He looked exactly his age. "She smiled twice before you even got to her office," he said. "Just so you know. She doesn't usually do that." Thomas looked at the boy for a moment. "Go practice your scales," he said. "Already did them," Ezra said cheerfully, and walked away. Thomas stood in the corridor. He could hear Norelle moving around in her office. The sound of papers. The faint clink of her mug. He stood there longer than he should have. Something was happening that he didn't have a clean name for. He was not someone who fell easily. He had built his whole life on surfaces that were level and controlled. But there was something about this woman. The way she paid attention. The way she was completely herself without trying. The way she held broken things gently. That was getting through every wall he knew how to build. He was carrying a document that would destroy her. He told himself he would deal with that later. The conversation that undid him happened on a Thursday. He had arrived to find Norelle sitting with Ezra in the rehearsal room, not a session. Just the two of them talking, the way they did sometimes. Thomas stood in the doorway, and she waved him in without interrupting herself. Ezra had asked her something Thomas hadn't caught, and she was answering it thoughtfully, the way she answered everything. "I think people help because of who they are," she said. "Not because of who deserves it. The moment you start calculating who deserves your kindness, you've already lost something." Ezra considered that. Even people who are bad to you? A small pause. "Even then," she said, "what they do is theirs. What you do is yours. Don't let their choices decide your character." Ezra nodded slowly. Then he looked up and noticed Thomas in the doorway. "He's been standing there the whole time," Ezra said. Norelle looked around, raised an eyebrow. "Eavesdropping?" she said. "Listening," Thomas said. "There's a difference." "He does that," Ezra said, standing up and gathering his things. "He just stands in doorways and listens." "It's a little weird." "Thank you, Ezra," Thomas said flatly. "You're welcome," Ezra said, and left with the energy of someone who was very pleased with himself. Norelle laughed. A real one. Unguarded, warm. It lasted only a second, but it filled the room. Thomas looked at her. She caught him looking. Something passed between them. Quick and unspoken. The kind of thing two people acknowledge without using words, and then both pretend didn't happen. She cleared her throat and picked up her mug. "I've been thinking about the agreement," she said. "So have I," he said. "I think I'm ready to look into it properly. The full version." He felt the familiar tightening. The thing he had been pushing down for weeks. "I'll have it sent this week," he said. She nodded. "I want to believe you," she said quietly. Not suspicious. Just honest. Like she was telling him something true about herself. He held her eyes. "You can trust me," he said. The words came out clean and automatic, the way practiced words do. He drove home in silence that night and sat in his apartment, with the lights off for a long time, and thought about what kind of man says those words while carrying what he was carrying. He called Garrison. I need to restructure the agreement, he said. Make it a real partnership. Take out the land clause. We find another way to get the parcel. A proper negotiation. Something she can actually… Thomas. Garrison's voice was careful, patient in the way that hides impatience. The permit window closes in 6 weeks. We've already filed the Northern Tower plans. If we pull the land clause, we have nothing. We're back to square one and we lose the whole block. Then we lose the block. Silence. You're serious? Yes. A long pause. Go home, Thomas, Garrison said. Sleep on it. Don't make a decision like this from wherever you are right now. Thomas ended the call and sat in the dark. He thought about her voice. What you do is yours. Don't let their choices decide your character. He was going to tell her the truth. That was what he decided, sitting there. He was going to go to Harmonia the next morning and tell her everything. The real ownership behind Vance and Associates, the land clause, all of it. Let her close the door on him if she wanted to. It was what he deserved. He was going to tell her. He was going to go in the morning. He arrived at Harmonia at 9. The building was open, the morning light coming through the front windows in long gold strips. He walked in and found Norelle at the front desk with a small girl who was upset about something. An argument with another student, from what Thomas could gather. Norelle was crouched to the girl's level, listening, not rushing her. Thomas waited. The girl settled. Left with her feelings handled. Norelle stood up, pressed her hands on the desk, and looked at Thomas with a small smile. You look like you didn't sleep, she said. I didn't. I need to tell you something. Something in his voice made her go still. She studied his face. Okay, she said. Come in. He followed her toward her office. Then, his phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. He looked at the screen. Caleb. Renata's husband, who never called unless it was urgent. He answered. The voice on the other end was careful in a way that told him everything before the words did. Thomas, it's Renata. She collapsed this morning. We're at Mercy General. You need to come. The world narrowed. Is she? They're running tests. Just please come. He stopped walking. He looked back at Norelle, who had turned around and read his face in 1 second. Go, she said. Immediately. No hesitation. Go right now, Thomas. He went. He did not say what he came to say. He would think about that moment for a long time afterward. The exact weight of what he'd been carrying to the door and then carried back out undelivered. Renata was 32, and she was the only person who had never been fooled by him. She was his younger sister, and she had always seen through every version of Thomas he performed for the world, right to the actual one. The boy who had worked 3 jobs at 19 to keep their mother's rent paid, who had cried once in a car park when their father died, and never again, who built and acquired and won because somewhere underneath all of it was a terror of going back to nothing that he had never fully named out loud. The tests came back over 2 days. Aplastic anemia, a rare, serious disorder where the bone marrow stops producing enough blood cells. Her body was failing quietly, from the inside. The doctors were careful with their language, which in his experience meant the news was bad. She needed a matched stem cell donor. A very specific compatibility. Rarer than most people realized. The whole family was tested. Nobody matched. A quiet call went out through the hospital's donor network. Nothing came back. Thomas sat in the hospital corridor at 2 a.m. with his jacket off and his face in his hands, and he was not a developer or a strategist or a titan of anything. He was a man who was terrified of losing the last person who truly knew him. On the 3rd day, Garrison called. She signed it, he said. Thomas went cold. What? Norelle Watkins. She signed the community partnership agreement yesterday afternoon. The legal team processed it this morning. The land transfer clause is in. The parcel is ours. We can break ground on schedule, Thomas. A long silence. I told you I wanted to restructure it, Thomas said. His voice was flat, very quiet. You told me to sleep on it, Garrison said. And then you went silent for 3 days. I had a closing window. I got it done. Garrison. Your sister needs you right now, Garrison said with the tone of a man who believed he was being reasonable. I handled the business. That's what I do. Focus on your family. The call ended. Thomas sat in the corridor with his phone in his hand. Down the hall, Renata was asleep. Through the window, he could see her, small in the white bed, a machine tracking the slow, stubborn work of her heart. He thought about Norelle in her office. The way she had said, I want to believe you. He thought about himself saying, You can trust me. He pressed his hand flat against his chest like he was checking if something was still there. He sat in that corridor for a long time, and the guilt arrived the way serious things arrived. Not all at once, but steadily, like water filling a room. Norelle found out on a Friday morning. A friend on the city planning board called her. His voice had the specific quality of someone delivering something they wish they didn't have to. He told her to find Section 11, Paragraph 4, Subclause C. She pulled the document out right there on the phone and found the paragraph and read it. Then she read it again. The language was technical and layered and careful, but what it clearly said was that by signing the community partnership agreement with Vance and Associates, Harmonia was transferring its land use rights for the purpose of development, 60 days to relocate. A relocation grant that was a fraction of what the land was worth. She had signed her center away. She had signed it because a man had sat across from her desk and looked her in the eye. She put the phone down and sat very still. The building was quiet around her. Through the wall, she could hear Ezra at the piano. She looked at her mother's photograph, leaning against the coffee mug. Then she put her head down on her arms on the desk. Her shoulders shook once. Twice. Then she pressed them flat and stilled herself and lifted her head. She sat like that for 10 minutes. Then she got up, knocked on the rehearsal room door, and opened it. Ezra looked up. He saw her face immediately. He saw everything. He always did. Norelle. I'm okay, she said. She stopped. Started again. Keep playing. Please. He held her eyes for a moment. Then he turned back to the piano and began to play. Softly, something slow and gentle that asked nothing of her. She stood in the doorway and listened and let it hold her for a minute. Then she closed the door and went to make her calls. She was at Mercy General 2 weeks later for a routine follow-up appointment with one of her little girls, a check-in for a small procedure she'd had 3 months ago. She was in the corridor waiting for the elevator when she overheard 2 nurses at the station nearby. The corridor was quiet and she caught pieces. A patient in the donor wing, aplastic anemia, a rare compatibility type they hadn't been able to match through the whole network. The elevator arrived, but he let it go. She stood there for a moment and thought about what she had said to Ezra, weeks ago now. What you do is yours. Don't let their choices decide your character. She thought about a woman she had never met, lying in a bed somewhere in this building, running out of time. Then she walked to the nurse's station. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to overhear. The patient you mentioned. Is there a voluntary screening? The nurse looked at her, then said yes. Norelle rolled up her sleeve. She did not ask the patient's name. She did not ask about the family. She did not think about Vance and Associates, or land transfer clauses, or anything except that a person somewhere in this building needed someone to show up for them. And she was here, and that was enough reason. She was a match. The attending physician went very still when the results came back, then picked up the phone and started making calls quickly. Norelle sat in the white room, answered questions, and signed consent forms. She helped because it was right, but she did not know yet whose sister she was saving. Before she left, she requested anonymity and asked the nurse for a card and a pen. She wrote a simple, short note. "I don't know you, but someone needed to show up for you and I was here, so I did. I hope you get everything back and feel the sun again, soon." She folded it and left it at the nurse's station to be passed along anonymously. Then she went home. The next morning, she opened Harmonia, the same as always. Thomas came out of the hospital changed. Renata was recovering. She sat on her hospital bed 6 days after the transplant and told him to stop hovering, and he felt the relief of it settle all the way into his bones. He didn't go back to Harmonia. He had no right to. But he needed to deal with what Garrison had done. Or rather, what he had let Garrison do. He called him. "I'm rescinding the Watkins agreement," he said. "Thomas, I'm rescinding it. All of it. And I'm filing a permanent protection notice on that parcel. Nothing in the Harmonia building or the land beneath it can be touched by Ridgway Group or Vance and Associates without her explicit written consent. I want it filed with the city by end of week. Do you understand what this costs? 40 million and 3 months. I've already run the numbers. We shift the tower footprint 2 blocks east. We lose 1 floor on the northern build. The project survives. And what about us?" Garrison's voice was flat now. "You designed this plan, Thomas. I executed it." "I know," Thomas said. "That's mine to carry. But I'm not going to leave her with the consequences of something I should have stopped." Garrison was quiet for a long time. "She's just a woman who runs a non-profit," he said. And there was something in how he said it. Dismissive, like Norelle was an inconvenience that had been given too much weight. That made Thomas go very still. "Don't do that," Thomas said quietly. "Don't even go there." Garrison said nothing. "Get it done," Thomas said. "And send me the filing confirmation." He ended the call. He sat at his desk and thought about a woman turning away from him, pressing her hands flat on a notice board, and the single forward drop of her head. He had cost her that. No amount of rescission paperwork was going to undo it. He knew that. But it was a start. And a start was the only thing he had. He went to find the donor. He was doing it for Renata, who wanted to say thank you. But he also knew it was for himself. Some need to locate the specific goodness that had reached into this situation and pulled his sister back from the edge of it. Dr. Osei had handled Renata's case. She had told Thomas the donor wanted to be anonymous and didn't drop content. He wasn't going to push. He just said, quietly, "Is there anything you can tell me?" "Anything at all. She only left a note for your sister. I kept it because I thought one day the family might want it. I can't give you a name, but I can read you the note if you'd like." "Please," he said. He heard paper unfolding. Then her voice, reading carefully. "I don't know you, but someone needed to show up for you, and I was here, so I did. I hope you get everything back. I hope you feel the sun again soon." Thomas stopped breathing for a moment. He knew those words. He had heard Norelle say it, a particularly depressed kid, and he recognized it now the way you recognize a voice you've only heard once, but that stayed with you. He asked carefully. The handwriting, was it very clear and deliberate? A small pause from Dr. Osei. "Yes," she said. Quietly. "Actually, yes." He sat down. He was at his desk, surrounded by everything he had built and earned and won, and none of it was in the room with him right now. She had done it after After the betrayal. After he had used every warm conversation and every careful visit to build enough trust to take her land from her. She had found out, and then walked into a hospital and given part of herself for a stranger. For his sister, without knowing. I hope you feel the sun again soon. He pressed his fist against his mouth and closed his eyes. He sat in all the silence of what he had done and what she had done anyway, and he let it be exactly as heavy as it was. It was, he thought, the least he could do. He drove to Harmonia, not with a plan, not with an argument rehearsed. He drove there because he could not spend one more hour sitting with what he knew and not standing in front of her. He found her in the small garden behind the building. It was a gray morning, November cold, and she was turning the soil over for winter. She heard the gate but didn't stop what she was doing. "Thomas," she said. The word landed flat and careful. Not cruel. Just exact. He stood at the edge of the plot. "It was you," he said. She went still. She pulled one glove off slowly. "How did you find out?" she asked. "The note you left for Renata. The doctor read it to me." He paused. "I hope you feel the sun again soon. I recognize that. I recognize the way you think." A long silence. A gray sky. The city behind the fence doing what cities do. "You left that note," he said, "after you already knew what I had done." "Yes. After you found the claws. After everything." "Yes." He looked at her. She still wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the turned soil with an expression he couldn't read. "Why?" he asked. Now, he's just a man standing in a garden asking the most genuine question he had ever asked. She pulled the other glove off and turned to face him. "I actually didn't know it was your sister in the first place. But even at that, I believe your sister needed someone to show up for her," she said. "And I was there. That's the whole story." He shook his head slowly. "You had every reason to let it go. After what I did." "What you did is yours," she said. "What I do is mine." Those words. He had heard them in the rehearsal room, said to a 16-year-old boy who needed to hear them. He hadn't known then that she lived by them that completely. He looked away. His jaw was tight. He was not going to come apart in this garden. He pressed his hands in his pockets. "I came to tell you the truth that morning," he said. "The morning Caleb called. I came specifically to tell you. About Vance and Associates, about the land clause, all of it. I was going to tell you everything and let you close the door on me if that's what you wanted." She was quiet. "And then the phone rang," he said. "And I left. And I didn't come back. And Garrison." He stopped. "What Garrison did? He did because he was following my original instructions. That's mine. I can't put that on him." Norelle looked at him for a long time with a face that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite anger. It was the complicated expression of a woman who has been fully wronged by someone she had started to believe in and is now trying to figure out what is honest. "I believed you," she said, simply. "That's what made it hurt. Not just the document. The fact that I believed you. I know. I don't give that away easily. I know. And I used it." He held her eyes. "I am sorry. Not because you found out. I am sorry because of what I did to someone who deserved better than that. You deserved better than that from the first minute." She held his gaze. She searched his face, the way she always did, without pretending she wasn't doing it. He let her look. He had nothing left to hide. "The agreement was rescinded," she said finally. "Yes. And the protection notice is filed. Nothing in this building or the land under it can be touched by my company or anyone else. Ever. Without your written consent." "I know. I got the paperwork." "That's not enough," he said. "I know it's not enough. I just needed you to know that I know that. A long quiet. And then something shifted in her. Ezra's recital is the 14th, she said. He blinked. He asked about you, he said. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. He said the man who stands in doorways and listens should come. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Tell him I'll be there, he said. She nodded, turned back to the garden, picked up her gloves. He stood there a moment longer. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, Your mother was right, by the way. She looked back. You can tell everything about a person, he said, by watching how they treat something that can't fight back. She looked at him steadily. Yes, she said. You can. He left. He drove home slowly. And for the first time since all of this began, he felt something other than guilt or strategy or the weight of what he'd done. He felt, faintly and carefully, like a person standing at the very beginning of something. The 14th came, and the recital room was warm and crowded. Families on folding chairs. Smaller children cross-legged on the floor at the front. Someone's parent had made jollof rice, and the whole building smelled of it. String lights along the ceiling. Thomas arrived and sat in the back. Norelle saw him from across the room. She was standing along the side wall in a deep green dress, her curls loose, and she looked at him for one moment. Just one. Before looking back at the stage. It was enough. 3 students performed before Ezra. Thomas sat through all of it with his hands folded in his lap, watching, present, in a way he hadn't been in a room in years. Then Ezra walked out. He was taller than he had been in October. That was the thing about 16. You could become a slightly different person every few months. He sat at the piano and the room settled around him. He leaned toward the microphone. This one is called Returning, he said. I wrote it for my dad. And for everyone who taught me it was okay to come back. He played. It wasn't a polished performance. It was better than that. It moved through grief and through doubt and through something on the other side of both that didn't have a clean name, but felt like the first morning after a long winter. Thomas did not look away. He had decided somewhere on the drive over that he was done managing his face. He sat there and let the music do what music does when you stop defending yourself against it. When Ezra finished, the room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then it erupted. Thomas stood. He was the first person on his feet. He didn't decide to, he was just standing. Ezra looked out at the room from the piano bench, and his composure cracked in the best way. He pressed both hands to his face and laughed. Across the room, Norelle watched Thomas stand up. She watched his face, the openness of it. The way a man looks when he has stopped performing for just long enough to be completely in a moment. She had seen glimpses of that man throughout all the weeks before everything fell apart. She had wondered if he was real. He was real. She came to him after. The room buzzing around them, families collecting children, someone handing out food. She stopped in front of him and held something out. It was a handwritten copy of Ezra's composition. Every note in Ezra's careful hand. He wanted you to have it, she said. He said you looked like you needed it more than anyone. Thomas took it and looked at the pages for a moment. Each note placed on purpose. Something made out of the worst thing that had ever happened to a person, turned into something that could move a room to its feet. He's going to be extraordinary, Thomas said. He already is, she said. They stood there. The music still in the air around them, neither of them moving. I'd like to start over, Thomas said. Not from before. Not from any of it. From right now. From this room. She looked at him carefully. You'll have to earn it, she said. All of it. Slowly. I know. I don't forgive quickly. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She studied him. The hazel eyes. The jaw. The man underneath all of it, the real one. The one who had almost proved her wrong and then did the harder thing anyway. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pressed something into his palm. He looked down. A small dried flower, brown with age. "From my mother's garden," she said. "She grew them every summer. I keep a few." A pause. "She used to say, 'Things that grow in hard ground grow the deepest roots.'" Thomas closed his fingers around it. He didn't say anything. There were no words that were big enough for this moment, and he knew enough, now, not to try to fill it with ones that weren't. He just stood there, in this warm, loud, imperfect room, holding a dead flower and a sheet of handwritten music, and the beginning of something he had not earned, but was going to spend a long time trying to deserve. 6 months later, Thomas was late. He was never late. He had not been late to a single thing in 11 years of professional life. He had strong opinions about lateness. He had, at various points, ended meetings over it, but he was standing in the Harmonia corridor at 7:43 in the evening, 17 minutes after he was supposed to arrive, slightly out of breath, holding a paper bag that was leaking something warm through the bottom because he had walked too fast from the car. Ezra was sitting on his bench. He looked up. He looked at the leaking bag. He looked back at Thomas. "You're late," he said. "I know." She moved dinner back twice already. "I know. I got held up on a call. You should have ended the call earlier." "I'm aware, Ezra. Thank you." Ezra nodded with the energy of someone who had been waiting to say exactly this, and was very satisfied with how it had gone. Then he looked at the bag again. "Is that the plantain?" "From that place on Clement Street. She mentioned it once, 3 months ago, and I wrote it down." Ezra looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his expression. Not amusement exactly, but the close cousin of it. The look of a boy who had watched two people circle each other for months, and was experiencing the particular satisfaction of being right about everything. "She mentioned it once," Ezra said slowly. 3 months ago. And you wrote it down." "Yes." "And then remembered it." "Yes." "And drove to Clement Street on a Tuesday." "Are you going somewhere with this?" "I'm just noting," Ezra said pleasantly, "that you're a completely different person than you were in October." Thomas opened his mouth. Closed it. There was nothing useful to say to that. "She's in the back garden," Ezra said, and went back to his phone. Thomas went through the building to the back garden, which in the spring and summer had become a real thing. Proper raised beds now, funded quietly through a Ridgeway Group community grant that Thomas had structured so his name was nowhere visible on the paperwork. Norelle had noticed anyway. She had looked at him over dinner one evening with that level gaze and said nothing, and then changed the subject, which was more devastating than any acknowledgement would have been. She was at the far end of the garden, sitting on the low wall with a mug, looking at the city lights coming on, one by one in the evening. She heard him come through the door and turned. She saw the bag. She saw his expression. A man who had rehearsed something on the way over, and then forgotten it upon arrival. And something warm moved across her face. "You're late," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." "Ezra told you off already?" "Thoroughly." She smiled. "The full one. The one that still, 6 months in, did something to his chest that no amount of familiarity had made ordinary." He sat down beside her on the wall. He set the bag between them. She opened it and looked inside, and then looked at him. "From Clement Street," she said. "Not a question. You mentioned it in January." "I mentioned it only once. I write things down." She shook her head slowly, but she was still smiling. They sat in the garden in the warm evening and ate plantain from the paper bag, and the city went on doing its thing beyond the fence, and neither of them felt the need to fill every silence. That was one of the things Thomas loved about being with her. The silences were not empty. They were full of something he didn't have a word for, a kind of ease that he had not known was available to him. He had spent his whole adult life filling silences with strategy. With her, he just sat in them. He looked at her the way he had been allowing himself to look at her for months now. Openly, without managing it. "Norel," he said. I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him. Something in his voice had shifted. Quieter, more careful. She recognized it. Her expressions settled into that particular attention she gave things that mattered. "I know I didn't earn this," he said. "I know the way this started. I know what I almost did and what I did do." She was very still. "But I am not going to spend the rest of my life apologizing to you," he said. "I don't think that's what you want, and I don't think it's what this is. But I want you to know that I carry it. And it makes me better at this, at being someone who deserves to sit in this garden with you." He looked at her directly. "I love you," he said. "I know that's a lot. I know you might not. Thomas, I just need you to know. Thomas." He stopped. She was looking at him with the expression that was somehow always more than whatever word he tried to put on it. Not quite a smile. Not quite something else. Something that lived in the space between certainty and softness. She reached over and took the paper bag from between them and set it aside. She folded her hands in her lap. She took a slow breath. "I'm not an easy person to love," she said. He was very still as he held his eyes. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while. I was just waiting to be sure you were staying." He reached over and took her hand. Carefully. "The way you hold something you understand the value of." She looked down at their hands. Then back at him. Thomas held her hand and did not calculate what came next. He did not weigh variables or plan his next move. He just sat in the garden with a woman who had shown him more grace than he had earned, and the soft piano sound from Ezra in rehearsal room. He had built a great deal of it. He would keep building. But right now, in this garden, he was not building anything. He was just here. And it was, without question, the best thing he had ever made room for.